For those of us who have grown up in the church, one of the very first stories we hear is the story of Adam, Eve, the serpent, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Traditionally, we're taught that Adam was brought up first from the dust of the earth, and the breath of life was given to him, and he was the first man. Following this, God felt that man ought not be alone, and so he put Adam into a deep sleep and created Eve from Adam's rib. Following this, Eve first and then Adam are tempted by the serpent to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They are punished by God, removed from the garden, and are forced to work and suffer pain during childbirth. They eventually go on to have children and populate the earth. However, this raises many questions. Can just two people populate the entire earth? Does that mean that their children, brothers and sisters, will have to lie with one another to produce children? Would God allow that or even approve of it? Would there not be genetic deformity? Can two human parents create a healthy human population? Furthermore, their son Cain is eventually banished and sent out to the land of Nod, where he will eventually find a wife, but also fears others will hear of what he's done and consequently attack him. Well, who are these people, and where did Cain find his wife in the first place? Could it be possible that Adam and Eve were not the first human beings, but rather two important people placed in the Garden of Eden for a specific purpose? Could Adam and Eve be metaphorical for mankind and womankind? Or was Adam simply alone in the garden, had no mate, and so God created Eve specifically for him while there were women far away? I'm Luke Caverns, and thank you guys so much for being here as we travel back 14 to 200,000 years into our ancient origins. One of the first things you have to do when you decide to take a step away from childlike faith within any religion is to decide the way you're going to approach having a deeper understanding of religious texts. Simply put, there are one of two ways to interpret. Either the text should be interpreted as entirely literal, or it should be acknowledged that in some cases, and at the author's discretion, symbolism or metaphors may be used. Many Christians tend to stick to the idea that the Bible should be interpreted as entirely literal. But let's take a look at Ezekiel 31. In these verses, Ezekiel goes on to describe the nation of Assyria as a cedar tree in Lebanon, thick with foliage that towered over other trees in the field. All the birds nested in its boughs, animals gave birth beneath its branches, and all the great nations lived in its shade. It even goes on to say that the cedars in the Garden of Eden could not rival it, and even that the cedars in Eden were envious of this Assyrian cedar tree. When you read this, do you honestly believe that Assyria was a tree so massive that every nation in and around Lebanon settled beneath it? No. This is symbolism, and it is metaphorical. Symbolism like this is riddled throughout the Bible. In fact, there are more than 24 times that trees alone are used to symbolize men, nations, races, and cities. So at a certain point, it becomes more of a strain on one's faith to take the Bible literally than it does to infer that the authors likely used a certain amount of symbolism and metaphors to describe certain events, eras, and situations that took place. So as we look at the story of Adam and Eve in a literal sense, we are left to assume that the tree in the Garden of Eden was in fact a tree. Eve and Adam ate of the tree and were punished by God for simply eating the fruit that they were instructed not to eat. Following this, they were still to be fruitful and multiply across the earth, so they had children of which brothers and sisters were born, grew up together, and then needed to lay with one another to further reproduce until they created nations so massive in numbers, scale, and intellect that they developed civilizations capable of doing things heinous enough that God felt they needed to be destroyed with a great flood. This is all perhaps acceptable until you get into Leviticus. In Leviticus, it is stated that one is not to uncover the nakedness of their sister, whether brought up in the family or in another home. Or let's go even further to see what Yahweh himself has to say about this matter. Leviticus 18:6. No one is to approach any close relatives to have any sexual relations. I am the Lord. Yahweh then goes on in very explicit detail listing every single possibility of incest and explicitly forbidding them. Does anyone read this passage and believe that God would allow a scenario in which only two humans could populate the earth through the means of incest? Modern studies have shown that at least 42% of children born through incest were born with severe physical or mental deformities or died before puberty. The most common trait of deformity, however, was children being born mentally handicapped. Are we really supposed to believe that at least 50% of Adam and Eve's children were severely mentally handicapped? Are we really supposed to believe that Yahweh would create a scenario in which the vast amount of human beings would be severely handicapped and deformed? Keep in mind, Adam and Eve were not instructed to be fruitful and multiply after they had sinned, but while they were in the garden. The civilizations that came from Adam and Eve were not simply small villages practicing witchcraft and warring against one another. They had to be so massive in size, so advanced, so intellectual, and performing acts so disturbing in nature, things that only a highly advanced and intellectual civilization could do, that God felt they needed to be utterly destroyed by a flood, leaving behind monuments and quarries that modern civilization can only recently replicate, if at all. Furthermore, are we not to bat an eye at the reality that Cain was worried about people in the land of Nod hearing of what he had done and in return trying to kill him as he had killed his brother? Where did these people come from? Who was he scared of? And where did he eventually go on to find his wife? Was she one of his sisters? Was she his aunt? Was she his niece? Are we supposed to believe that our entire lineage comes from incest, in which Yahweh has gone into explicit detail forbidding any relationship whatsoever inside the family? The answer is a resounding no. This is obviously not the case. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. He then tells them to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. So from a literal stance, men and women are instructed to reproduce in Genesis 1, and it is not until Genesis 2 that we even learn of Adam's existence. Furthermore, the idea that Adam was the only man and women did not exist at all can be challenged when you carefully read why Eve was made for Adam. It says, "The man gave names to all livestock and to the birds of the heavens and to every beast of the field. But for Adam, not was found a helper suitable." This is the exact Hebrew translation. Not was found a helper suitable. That doesn't sound to me like women didn't exist at all. It sounds more like there was not a woman suitable for Adam, or that Adam was alone in the garden and Eve was created just for him. So as we can see, we are left in a place where there really is not a lot given for us to make the assertion that Adam and Eve were the first or only man and woman, let alone for us to believe that God would have the earth populated by means of incest when he so explicitly forbids it. We also see that the Bible is likely not always written in a literal sense, which can be applied to Adam and Eve possibly being representative of mankind and womankind. But it is also a very good lens to view early biblical text, especially when going into the next chapter of Genesis. It says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were naked, and they were not ashamed." What a particular thing to say. They'd become one flesh, meaning they were having sex but were not ashamed of their nakedness or of their sexuality. It's almost like this was written as a foreshadowing of what is to come, meaning that sexual immorality had not tainted them yet, but it was about to. I'm Luke Caverns, and we'll find out the true meaning of our original sin next time on Ancient Origins. Okay, so answering some of my favorite comments from the last video, did God cause the Big Bang? Some of these may be too long for me to read back to you, but I will put them up on the screen and you can pause to read them if you like. So I really like this first comment from M. Buds, and yes, a lot of times scientists, they spend their entire life trying to disprove God, or maybe not necessarily trying to disprove God, but they try to figure out the universe, and it eventually leads them back to God, and they eventually concede that either there is a God and they become a Christian or Muslim or something like that, or they admit, like Stephen Hawking did, that the universe is omniscient and that it makes decisions on its own accord. So I really like this comment. It's very insightful. So the second comment is from Hira. I think I'm reading that right. So I think it's so interesting when my Muslims brothers and sisters leave comments talking about the Quran. It's very interesting, and I think that there is a lot of cross-pollination of truth between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And a lot of you guys came from the Three Muslims podcast, and I'm just so unbelievably grateful that they put me on their platform. It's been amazing. I've loved to get to know your community, and you guys have been so nice to me. So thank you so much for this comment. Forgore. So this is one of the nicest comments I've ever gotten. I'm making a board right now full of all of my earliest comments, maybe before I hit like 10K or something like that. I'm making a board. I'm going to print them all out. I'm going to put them on my wall somewhere here in my office, just as a reminder of all the very first people, and it'll have your name on it. And I think these 3 comments are going to be ones that go on that board. So I really appreciate all of you guys. I want to do YouTube as a career, and I want to do something meaningful and talk about something meaningful. So I'm just really, really grateful for you guys. And I'm going to be putting out content a lot more often than I have lately. I was just sick over the weekend, but we're going to be back with a vengeance very soon. So thank you guys so much. I'm Luke Caverns, and we'll see you later.